Why is Rupi Kaur so successful? I just wanted to get some things off my chest. In my opinion, I think a lot of poems on Instagram are better than Rupi Kaur's poems. Hi, my name's The Proud, and today I wanted to talk about Rupi Kaur's new poetry collection, Homebody. So, what do you mean, former instapoet? Basically, like around this time last year, I went through this kind of phase of writing a lot of poems at 3 a.m. It lasted for like about 6 months, and then after that I just kind of like gradually moved away, and for various reasons, some of which I will be discussing throughout this video. But I kind of have to say that after I read a lot of poetry, Instagram poetry, after I wrote my own Instagram poetry, after 2 years later, after I came back to Homebody by Rupi Kaur 2 days ago, when I read it, trying very hard to be open-minded, I just felt this sense of disappointment, frustration, and sadness. Partially because of the issues that Rupi Kaur raises in her book, but largely because of something else. And that's what I want to talk about in this video. Firstly, let's talk about what's written inside this book. So I bought this 2 days ago. I've read it twice. And last night I also tried reading it at 3 a.m. because that's usually when my mind is most vulnerable to some like poetry style thoughts. I just wanted to say that this video is less so about reviewing Rupi Kaur's poetry itself and more to do with about Instagram poetry in general and why exactly has Rupi Kaur become so popular. I feel like there's many videos out there analyzing Rupi Kaur's poetry, but there isn't one yet analyzing Rupi Kaur's success, which I would like to talk about today. I think that Rupi has a talent for writing relatable, easily digestible lines which can be easily liked as you scroll past a picture on Instagram. However, if you consider them to be poetry, it's kind of like, what am I even supposed to do with this? Okay, overall, I'm just gonna say firstly that while I don't think that this is perhaps a great book of poetry, that doesn't mean that I think it's meaningless. I think it has value in other ways. But first, we're gonna get into why I think this is not good poetry. So when you open up the first poem, this is what you get. It says, "I'm in the darkest room of my life." And that's it. The thing is, so many of Rupi's poems are so short and just there. They are just statements. Here you have, "I'm in the darkest room of my life." And then a few pages later, you have, "My mind keeps running off to dark corners and coming back with reasons for why I am not enough." Then, I'm just opening a random page here, flipping until I find an example. "We can work at our own pace and still be successful." Basically, this book is full of very short, like 1 to 4 line poems that are kind of just sentences that I feel like anybody at all could say. My mom, my grandpa, a bus driver. We can work at our own pace and still be successful. That's probably what perhaps my dad might have said that to me when I said, I feel like I'm not doing enough work or something like that. And I'm not sure whether this can be considered poetry. The thing is that I know this has already been like debated quite a lot, but because the definition of poetry is vague, I feel like that's kind of the loophole where a lot of these Instagram poets can write just these things that maybe, I mean, I don't know, they just, like, a lot of people basically write things and then they call it poetry because the definition of poetry is vague, and the definition of good poetry is also vague. What makes a poem good? Is it because it makes you feel something? Is it because it has intricate metaphors? There's not really any way of particularly defining it, and so that's how all of these things just end up going under the umbrella term poetry. Even when it feels like a lot of them are very similar to, they remind me of like when you text a friend and you can't be bothered to use capital letters and you're kind of in a rush, so you press enter a lot so they know that you're reading, like they know that you're there, like replying to them. That's kind of what it reminds me of. And you know, I'm not saying that a poem, just because a poem is short doesn't mean it's going to be bad. Short poems can be good as well. Although when it gets too short, I think the shortest poem in this book is three words. Masturbation is meditation. That's it. So when a poem is that short, I feel like, what can you even say about it? Is it even a poem? It kind of rhymes, but what about something like masturbation is motivation? Is that a poem? Or is it just something I randomly said just now, just to like make a point? I feel like I question why Rupi would choose to write something which has no owner. It's just a phrase that anybody could say. She doesn't own this phrase. When you write something, don't you want to write something that nobody else could write? Why do you write something that literally I might just say offhand to somebody else? Why would I just write sentences which are just statements? I think that this book has a lot of nice things in it, nice statements. For example, this one: I am not interested in feminism that excludes trans women. I mean, yeah, I agree with that statement, but it's not something that I feel is enough to make me feel anything. I'm just like, yes, that's right, that's true, okay, good. I mean, yeah. And that just makes me kind of sad. It's undeniable that Rupi Kaur has been highly successful in creating this series of books and has a large following on Instagram. Obviously, she tops the Times bestseller book charts. She does all of this with this sort of book. I think Rupi has been very intelligent in carving out this market to herself, where she appeals to relatability, to something that's easy to read. Very appropriate for Instagram, where you just scroll past quickly. She makes everything aesthetic, so it just fits in very well with today's market and what people now want. This is something I admire her for. You know, reading poetry, that makes you seem intellectual. You're using your brain, you're being worldly, you're appreciating language. That's what people want to appear that they're doing, without actually having to bother to do any of those things, to read actually intricate poems. They just want an easy, I think I read somewhere, a fast food version of poetry, and that's exactly what Rupi Kaur is providing to her audience. Short poems will get more likes than long poems because nobody is bothered to read the long poems. The more straightforward it is, the better, because people don't have to put in any effort to understand it. The more vague it is, the better, because then it can apply to anybody. And so Rupi ticks all of those boxes. So, success. Thing is, I'm not actually criticizing Rupi at all for seeing this open space in the market and then taking advantage of it if that's what she's doing, or maybe she just thinks her poetry is good. I mean, that's not really an issue as well. I do think that Rupi, this book, does have like nice thoughts in it. It does have good points to make. It raises issues about women of color, like speaking up for women of color, women that are oppressed in many situations, like immigrants, like women of color, LGBTQ plus women. It talks about being an immigrant and about like productivity, the need to be productive all the time in today's society, that sort of thing. So I do think this book raises some nice issues. I don't think there's anything wrong with it inherently. I just feel, like I said, I just feel frustrated when reading it. Instagram poetry. What is it really like? Is Instagram poetry as bad as you think that it is? Are all poems on Instagram like Rupi Kaur's poems? If you say Instagram poetry, the first thing you'll think of is Rupi Kaur, like the leader of Instagram poetry these days. Instagram poets aspire to be Rupi Kaur because she's achieved this level of success that other people are trying to reach as well. And I feel like most people have the view that Instagram poetry is this, Rupi Kaur or Atticus poetry, poems which don't really have that much meaning. They're very short, they're very relatable, they're very simple in their message. They say exactly what they want to say. The shorter, the better. And there's sort of this idea that they're targeting this group of young teenage girls who don't really know much about poetry or are able to appreciate poetry in general. I want to raise this really interesting example of a reporter who went undercover as an instapoet. This reporter wanted to understand what was instapoetry, like what made instapoetry so successful? Is instapoetry really as bad as people say it is, and things like that. So he wrote a bunch of poems which he by himself thought were bad, but the thing is, he amassed so many followers in such a short period of time. He wrote these very short poems, reminiscent of the style of popular poets today, such as Rupi Kaur. And yeah, he just kept posting, kept getting likes, getting followers, up to the point where a girl DM'd him saying that she had just broken up with her boyfriend and was crying all night reading his poems. Okay, so this is their latest poem. My compass always points to you. There's a bunch of spaces. So this was one of the things that kind of put me off writing poems and posting them on Instagram, because I started feeling like I kind of felt like there wasn't much meaning to anything. There was less meaning to the numbers that you saw on Instagram, and that was a bit depressing to realize. So in the instapoet community, should I kind of explain how it works? There's always there's many people in this Instagram poet community. Everybody posts their poems, they like each other's posts. If you're mutuals, I guess you would call it, you would post shout outs on their story, comment on the poems that you like the poems, obviously, if you like them. The thing is, after a while, just like everything else on social media, I guess, it's do you actually read my poems, or are you just liking them so that I like your poems? And it's just, everything becomes even though this is, poetry, supposed to be something deep and meaningful, that's just what it ends up being. So that was one of the reasons why I stopped writing. The other reason being, I just sort of lost inspiration as well. I really do respect Rupi. I do respect these Instagram poets. This isn't really to criticize them at all, but rather like something I wanted to say about how success is achieved, and maybe like as a voice of support for people who are struggling to succeed by writing Instagram poetry, because it's not really about the poetry that you write, but more about writing something that is in line with the demand of people today. And it just so happens that this is what people want today. And so that's what has propelled all of these people to success, not because their writing is necessarily any better than yours. Thank you so much for watching. Please give it a like if you liked this video. Please comment if you have something to say. Please subscribe if you would like to see more. See you next time.